Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. So if we're going to be doing the Blessed Darkness with Saint Nectarios, then that means it is a, if I'm not mistaken, an 8-week module. Let me see. Saint Nectarios, Ministries, Adult Education, Blessed Darkness. Oh, excuse me, a 6-week class. And so it will delve into, and I will email all the participants of this class the syllabus now that we know what we're going to be doing. So it will go into the first setting class will be Expectation of the Nations. The second class will be the Divinity of Jesus Christ. That'll be done in 2 parts. The third class will be God's Revelation to the World, and also in 2 parts. And then the final class will be the Brilliance of the Christian Faith. So to give a little context of this book, Christology, was written by Saint Nectarios right around the turn of the century, so about 1900. And this was during the time when he was the dean of the Rosario Seminary in Athens. So for us to understand a little bit about Saint Nectarios' work of Christology, we've got to know a little bit about his life. Does everyone have kind of a working knowledge of the life of Saint Nectarios?
Actually, no. I'm going to go check on something in the oven real quick. I'll be right back. But yeah, if we can start there, that would be great.
Sure. So Ed, can Dr. Marina hear me from where she's at? Okay, good. So Saint Nectarios was born very, very humble, and he was very, very poor, and he wanted desperately to go to Constantinople to learn about theology, to learn about the church, and so he endeavored to basically get onto a boat, and on that boat he managed to procure passage. It was very, very hard for him, and he was young. He was all by himself, and he was about 12 years old. On his way there, he had around his neck a treasure that was passed down in his family of a piece of the one true cross. It was inside of a reliquary on a chain that he had. And while he was on his way there, he got off the boat. Excuse me, once he got to Constantinople, he got off the boat and realized that his cross was missing. And he was in despair. He was despondent. He didn't know what to do. And so he moped around until finally one of the ship's wrights came and grabbed him and said, the captain's been looking for you, because St. Nectarios had told the captain, my cross is missing. It's a treasure. It must have fallen overboard. I don't know what happened to it. So they go back to the boat, and there's a pounding in the engine room that is so loud that it's causing everyone a great deal of fear. Well, they open up one of the hatches underneath, and they discover that the thing that's been pounding on the ship was the cross. And so it basically pops up out of the hatch and lands in the boy's hand. And so he goes back. While he's in Constantinople, he's learning how to read, and the way he basically taught himself how to read and to learn a little bit was he worked at a tobacco store. And so he was rolling cigarettes. And what he would do is he would write verses inside the cigarettes paper in order to basically teach himself how to write and to try to deepen his mind to understand Scripture. Well, eventually he gets noticed. Eventually he goes to seminary, and eventually becomes a priest and a bishop of Pentopolis, which means the 5 cities in Alexandria. So he was ordained by the Patriarch of Alexandria. Now, during the time of St. Nectarios, as was prior to him, and as there is now, and as there will always be, there was politics. And so people did not like that a young man like him had been given this very beautiful see of Pentopolis. So they made up rumors about him. So strong was this opposition to him that even though the patriarch knew that St. Nectarios was innocent of any kind of wrongdoing, he removed St. Nectarios with a letter of suspension that read, "Suspended by knowledge of the patriarch." So in other words, no information, no knowledge whatsoever. And so he was basically dismissed, and he was not able to serve as a bishop. He would go from parish to parish to parish as an itinerant priest. He would always seem to get a lot of people following him, but then eventually the rumors from Alexandria would come, and people would say, oh my gosh, there has to be rumors. He's got a letter of suspension after all, and they would kick him out. But there was this core group of people that were following him that would go from parish to parish to parish where he was at. And these core people were able to secure him a position at the Rosario Seminary. And while he was there, he was the dean of the seminary, and every day he would serve liturgy at St. George Church on the seminary grounds. One amazing story from that time at the school, which kind of tells you a little bit about the character of St. Nectarios, is that there was two janitors that were fighting, and they brought them to St. Nectarios and said, they're fighting. What should we do with them? He said, it's my fault. I'm not praying or fasting enough. And so he said, you guys go and we'll see how things go in a week. Well, a week later, St. Nectarios, who already has a huge fasting regimen, he looks gaunt, he looks weak because he hasn't gotten any sleep because he's been fasting and praying all night. Again, they get in a fight. And again, they bring him to his office. And St. Nectarios says, my boys, I failed you. I must increase more my fasting, more my prayers. They were so humbled the fact that he was basically killing himself for them that they said, Father, forgive us, we will never fight again. Another amazing story was there was another janitor.
Yeah.
What's that, doctor?
But I wonder if anyone's used that on their kids, if it's been effective.
Well, another example was this one janitor got sick, and he was not able to come to work for a week. He was very, very sick. And when he got back to work, he saw that his area of work, which was the toilet stalls, everything was shining, pristine, gorgeous. And so he immediately assumed they hired someone else. I'm out of a job. And so he goes to the dean's office. He goes to St. Nectarios' office crying, says, they've gotten rid of me. They've gotten rid of me. I'm ruined, because he was poor. They were all poor. And St. Nectarios said, shh. Don't tell anyone. I clean the toilets. So every night while the janitor was sick, St. Nectarios would go and he would do the janitor's job so that no one would notice that the janitor's job wasn't getting done, to protect him. Eventually, St. Nectarios was able to fulfill a dream of his, which was to start a convent of nuns. And so he did this on the island of Egina. And he was not able to see it reach completion because he, unfortunately, got pancreatic cancer. Or at least it was a cancer of the stomach if it wasn't pancreatic. He suffered terribly. And they brought him to basically the poorest of the poor hospitals in Athens. And they weren't able to do anything for him. And so he suffered in agony during his last hours. After he died, because they just didn't have time or room to even wash the sheets for the next patient, they brought in another cancer patient, laid them on the bed that St. Nectarios had just died on after they had taken his body away, and the man's cancer was immediately gone. It was immediately healed. So there's a tradition that in Greece you bury a body for 6 years, and after 6 years, about then is when a body will skeletonize. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time, sometimes it takes a little less time, but the average time that they've said for basically bodies in a crypt to fully skeletonize is 6 years. And the reason why they do that is there's really not a lot of room to bury people in Greece. And so people will basically be buried, and then their bodies will be compressed basically into a box about yay big, because once we take all our bones apart, there's not a lot to us. And they'll put those into mausoleums if families can afford them. But the funny thing that happened when they took St. Nectarios' body out of the vault, it was incorrupt. It hadn't corrupted at all. It looked like he had just died. And so one of the bishops in that area that had heard all of the rumors about St. Nectarios says, this is a sign that he is cursed, that God won't even let his body have rest, that he won't be allowed to decompose. And some people said, are you sure? That seems kind of more along the lines of a saint than it seems more on the lines of cursed relics. He says, no, I'm positive. But you know what? Just to show you, we'll bring his corpse to the ocean. We'll lay it there. The salt air, the animals, the birds, they'll peck it clean. It'll be a skeleton in 3 or 4 days. And so they dragged his body over to the beach. But the next day, when they all came back, the next morning, they found his body on a stone. It had been seemingly washed on the stone and perfectly laying out. And not only that, it was starting to exude a myrrh scent. And so people realized very quickly, oh, this isn't what we thought it was. And so even though St. Nectarios had lived his entire life practically, hated, abased, lied about, only then did people realize this man, they were lying about him the whole time. And all of the people that had been following him started to say, you fools, did you not realize, did you not see all the things that he was doing, all the good things that he was teaching? And so all of his students from the seminary, all the people that had been following him, they all basically said, this man is a saint. And in very rapid order, about 20 years later, he was canonized as a saint and became known throughout the Orthodox world as the patron saint of cancer. And so a lot of people, when they are suffering from cancer, they will ask for intercessions from St. Nectarios, or they will make a pilgrimage to Egina to be anointed with the oil from his tomb. So that is a little bit about the life of St. Nectarios and just how miraculous he is. A few years after he was canonized, his body skeletalized, and he appeared in a vision to some priests to say basically he allowed his body to skeletalize so that his relics could be spread all over the world. Now, what's interesting about St. Nectarios, is, especially in this era, is that, of course, everyone's heard of people like St. George, St. Demetrius, St. Andrew. These saints are known everywhere. But by and large, especially for the last 500 years or so, saints are localized. And the reason why they're localized is because they're supposed to be models for the people there. So if you go to Serbia, there are a lot of saints that are specific to Serbia. If you go to Greece, there are a lot of saints that are specific to Greece. Russia, there are a lot of saints that are specific to Russia. It's not meaning that they're not saints other places. It just means that their cult of veneration, where people know about that saint's life and can relate more to that saint's life, are in those areas. That's one of the reasons why you'll see St. Sava Church for a lot of Serbian churches, because that is a very dear saint to that people. So what is interesting about St. Nectarios is, despite the fact that he is a Greek saint, by and large, he is everywhere. You go to Russia, you'll find relics, icons, churches for St. Nectarios. You go to Jerusalem, there's icons and veneration of St. Nectarios. You go to Japan, there's icons and veneration of St. Nectarios. He is venerated everywhere. He is one of the most miraculous saints of the 21st century. What's also neat about him is that he had one particularly good spiritual son who eventually made his way to St. John the Theologian's monastery on Patmos, and founded his own monastery of the Annunciation, also on Patmos. And he was the only person outside of St. Nectarios' own mother that was allowed to basically stay inside St. Nectarios' cell. Of course, he was partially a monk, and that is Amphilochios Makris, who was just canonized. And so the children of Amphilochios Makris are also saintly people. So we have a long line of spiritual fatherhood from St. Nectarios leading down even to this present day, with priests all over the world. So St. Nectarios is incredible in that regard. And that would just be enough with his spiritual examples. But what's really amazing is when you actually start to read his works, you see that he is beyond just merely intelligent. St. Nectarios he's probably one of the greatest minds, because what he does is he codifies academic knowledge, theological knowledge, and other knowledges, brings them together, synthesizes them into a way that's easily understandable. Now, the book that you all are going to be reading, and I'm going to have to get copies of it now that we know what book we're going to be doing for the bookstore, Christology by St. Nectarios, is amazing because it's profound. I mean, it is the hardest theology you could possibly imagine, but it's made completely palatable that anyone can understand it. And what you will see very quickly is that St. Nectarios is not just approaching it from a theological perspective of who and what is Jesus Christ. He definitely does that. But he is going to approach it from a way that is cosmologically very salient for this time. When people are exploring world religions and they're trying to say, okay, what's the truth here? What's the truth here? What's the truth here? And St. Nectarios basically brings everything back to the statement from Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. And everything is going to come back to that. And so every element of these classes, and like I said, I will email you all the syllabus for going forward. Everything is going to relate back to that, to say, who is Jesus Christ? What is Jesus Christ? And the perfection of his message. Now, are there any questions or thoughts or comments on what we are going to be covering?
Can I ask a few questions about St. Nectarios, actually?
Absolutely.
So I guess my first thought was when you mentioned about him being sort of like maligned and exiled and things like that, it seems like there's a lot of saints in our history that's happened to. And so if you can remind us of, I feel like St. Basil was, I know John Chrysostom was multiple times, so maybe if you could touch on that. And then when you talked about his spiritual son, we were like, you know, just doing a quick search on St. Nectarios before we started, and I saw that there was a connection with St. Savas of Kalymnos, and I don't remember exactly what the connection was there, but it seemed like he had a lot of saintly people around him. So if you know anything about that story, and then, yeah, I think that was it for now. Yeah.
So the St. Sava of Kalymnos, I'll have to research myself because I vaguely remember, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to give false information.
Yeah,
so I'll have to do
it recently. I think they were good friends, but I don't remember if he was spiritual son or father to him or what the connection was there. But that's incredible, though, to just even have three men who were friends or spiritual, you know, brothers or fathers to each other who all became saints. That's, yeah. Anyway.
And a lot of his spiritual children will probably become saints. For example, Amphilochus just became a saint. His spiritual child was Joseph the Hesychast, who is the spiritual father of a huge slew of abbots on Mount Athos from about 50 years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken, but I think St. Paisios was also kind of tied into that as well. But what we see about that is this connection of holiness, that basically the Holy Spirit bringing these people together. But the first point that you made, Doctor, is very, very salient because it's kind of speaks counter to what we see in the world today, where people seem to think that if you follow after Christ, you're going to be rich, you're going to have a good job, you'll never have to worry, he'll take care of everything, and if it doesn't, it just means you don't have enough faith. What we see in the person of St. Nectarios, St. Eustatios, the prophet Job, you're right, St. Basil the Great, St. John Chrysostom, St. Gregory the Theologian, all of them, St. Gregory of Nyssa, all of them suffered greatly. And so it would be amazing to people if they understood, just because when people hear the word, oh, St. John Chrysostom, he must have been really well liked. Not exactly. He was exiled 3 times. And granted, when he came back, on one of his exiles, they took the boat from the harbor and they brought it to the church with him still in it because they were so excited to have him back. But the reality is that people are fickle and politics are always present. So as nice as it would be to think that, you know, everything was just theological and beautiful, it really wasn't. I mean, these were people that were working hard and were, a lot of times they were maligned and not appreciated. St. Basil the Great, he died at 60. And you know, he was very, very holy. I mean, he's great because of all the amazing things he did, but if we're being honest, he worked himself to death because he had to do those things, because they were dealing with the heresies of Arianism and trying to keep the church alive and whole at the time, as well as deal with all of the major things that were going on. I mean, St. Basil the Great for our church, I mean, he had to deal with the emperor taxing his people beyond measure. So he was having to deal with politics from the state, politics from the church, invaders coming and attacking his people and trying to keep everyone whole, as well as trying to make sure that they were spiritually fed and sound to understand their faith. And he did all of it. So we see this commonality that the saints of God, a lot of times they suffered. And a lot of times they were not very well liked in this life. And I think that this is on purpose so that their glory can come later. For example, Saint Fanurius, who is a very beloved saint. People pray to him all the time now to help them find lost items. But his story didn't even come to us until after he had been gone for almost 1,000 years. Same with Saints Nicholas, Raphael, and Irene of Lesbos. They were also hidden for a long, long time because God wanted their glory to come later. So this idea of delayed glory is to our benefit, and it shows our humility. And it also shows the humility of our Lord Jesus Christ, that he himself humbled himself, allowed himself to be maligned, allowed himself to be marginalized, to show us that there is this excellent way. So this is a commonality in the saints. Of course, we look at their suffering, we're like, oh my gosh, how could they deal with that? And then on top of that, to deal with cancer. And what's interesting about that is you look at some of these amazing saints, like Saint Nectarios, Saint Paisios. Both of these holy men died from cancer. And you think to yourself, well, sickness is related to sin a lot of times. Well, what did they do that somehow they got sick? That's not exactly what we're looking at here with the two of them. We have to suffer. We have to carry our crosses, as we've said the last 2 Sundays, to carry our cross to follow after Christ. But what do you do if you've reached a level of piety where things don't bother you? We're going to get to this in a second. We're going to talk about when Jesus Christ talks about blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. But what do you do if you're not bothered? People saying mean things about you doesn't bother you. People stealing from you doesn't bother you. Being poor doesn't bother you. That nothing that anyone says about you bothers you. Well, for your holy like these people, they might be starting to think, I'm not suffering. What am I giving to God? What have I given to God? What am I going to say to him when I get to paradise? I've offered nothing. God, give me something so that I can see you, so that I can give something to you. And so that's one of the theories as to why St. Nectarios might have suffered physically so terribly at the end. The same with St. Paisios. It was not that these were sinful men, quite the opposite. They were very holy men. But they endured these things to show us a couple of things. One, that even holy people can endure very hard things. But also to show us that there is glory in these as well, in the way that they carried themselves while still suffering these illnesses. But let's track back a little bit to the statement about meekness. What is the definition of meek?
Bread.
So a lot of people, when they hear meek, they think the person is probably a little timid, a little bit demure. Someone that might be pushed around, somebody that is meek. But that's not the definition of meek. All of the qualities listed in the Beatitudes are all qualities. When it says, blessed is the man, this harkens back to the very first psalm. The very first psalm, Psalm 1, begins with, blessed is the man. Well, who is the man? Jesus Christ. This is the person. This is the man that is blessed. Jesus Christ is. And blessed means happy. So happy and meek don't kind of seem to jive when we look at it from that kind of definition. And Jesus Christ is a lot of things. A pushover is not one of them. Somebody that can be easily just knocked over. So what is meek? Meek is somebody that is not able to be swayed one way or the other. And so to kind of illustrate this, and forgive me if I've said this story before, about a monk that was a little prideful. Have you all heard this story before? Okay, so there was a monk that was very, very good, very, very wise, and people looked at him and said, wow, this guy's going to be the next abbot. He's pretty holy. Well, his spiritual father saw that there was some trouble in that he was starting to believe these things about him, that he was getting kind of a puffed up head. So his spiritual father took him to the cemetery of the monastery. Now, the monastery cemeteries are basically row upon row of skulls with the pile of bones off to the side. So after basically the monks are skeletalized, they take all of their bones, put them all in one big pile, and then they put their names underneath their skulls all along the wall. So he goes in there and he tells the young man, tonight, all night, I want you to curse all of these monks. Tell them how bad they are. Tell them how worthless they are. Well, this monk, he was obedient. He was a good monk. So he spent the whole night screaming and yelling and railing and cursing at them. He even threw a rock at one of the skulls and it cracked the skull of one of the monks. And by the next morning, when his spiritual father opened the cemetery, he was huffing, he was puffing, he had gotten himself really worked up, really angry. The spiritual father said, okay, good. Go about your normal duties. Come back again tonight. And so his spiritual son did that, came back. Said, now tonight, I want you to tell your brothers how amazing they are. And so out of obedience, he starts lauding them, talking about how wonderful they are, all these wonderful, wonderful saints, of whom he is not worthy to be in the same room. He takes plaster and covers up the crack on the skull that he had through the rock. And he's weeping and crying for the holiness in the room that he's not worthy to be a part of. The spiritual father opens the door the next morning, and of course, after 2.5 days of no sleep and just constant working, the monk's tired. And so his spiritual father asks him, so when you cursed your brothers, how did they respond? How did they respond? They're dead. They didn't respond at all. They didn't say anything to you? No, they didn't say anything to me. They didn't look like they got angry? No, skulls don't grimace. They're the same. Okay, and the next night, when you praised them, how did they react? Did they giggle? Did they laugh? Did they blush? No, they're dead. They can't do that. There's no way that they can be affected by any of that. The spiritual father said, you must be like the dead. Praise and slander, the same thing, have no effect, mean nothing to you. That is what it means to be meek. And so if you are meek in that understanding, when we hear the expression, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, it basically means that if no one can push you around, if no one can control you, then you can control the world. And that's what it means to be meek. So these saints that were so meek, they made it seem like they were a pushover. They weren't. They were in control. They were the ones that were following the will of God wherever it took them, in all humility and strengthened in it. And that's why they were able to continue to say amazing things. It'd be so easy for someone like St. Nectarios to spend that many years to get depressed, to say, why doesn't anybody like me? I haven't done any of the things that they're accusing me of. It would have been easy for him to try to say, you know what, wait, where's the proof? Where's the proof? Where's the proof? He didn't do any of that. Just accepted it, kept going, believing that God would reveal the truth in his time. And that if God had not already defended him, God will eventually defend him. And now we see St. Nectarios for what he is. So excellent question and point, Doctor. Anyone else?
Remind me, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just learning how this works. What were the years that he lived again? Remind me.
Let me pull it up real quick. He lived he was born in 1846 and he died in 1920.
Yeah, a modern day saint.
Extremely modern, and one of the most miraculous saints of our era. So this is one of the reasons why Saint Nectarios is so relatable to us, because so many times people look at the saints and they say, yeah, that's, first century, second century, third century. There are no saints. There's nobody that's a saint now. Those are all things from the ancient past. But what we're seeing now with Mother Gabriela, Saint Paisios, Saint Porphyrios, Saint Nectarios, which was kind of the big forerunner of this, is a new era of holiness.
Beautiful saints, yeah. I read the book about Mother Gabriela.
It's amazing to me because everyone has heard about Mother Teresa, but Mother Gabriela was her contemporary and was doing much the same things. And in her humility, she was also elevated to certain levels of holiness. That was just absolutely incredible.
And has she been made a saint?
You know what? I don't know if she's been canonized yet.
I haven't heard of that yet.
I imagine that she's a contemporary of a lot of the saints that have been canonized in recent years. I would not be surprised if in the next couple of years she also is canonized. Because I think she died recently. I think she died like right when I was in seminary in 2000. And generally speaking, it takes about 20 years for canonization to happen. It doesn't mean that the saint is not a saint. We're not like the Catholic Church where canonization has to come from the top down. For us, we look at it as the people recognize the saint in the same way that we look at ordination. When the people say axios, you are worthy, it is coming down from the people. So the people recognize the person as a saint. So it doesn't have to be recognized from the top for us to say, okay, this person is a saint. Most of us already know that Mother Gabriela is a saint. A lot of the modern day saints are already saints. That us attaching that label doesn't change what they are. They've already accomplished and been victorious. All that means is that now we have a canonical date in the Synaxarion to say this is their feast day.
Say it might actually be the opposite. It seems like a lot of people knew Saint Nectarios was a saint while the bishop was claiming that he was cursed and putting his body out on the beach.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly it, because it shows us that people and the church, and by church I mean little c, not big C, are corrupt, are fallible. We can make mistakes. And so it is like with everything within Orthodoxy, it is not the statement of the one person, but the concordance, the symphony of the body, of everyone. So everyone coming together and saying, this is a saint. We all declare it so, and so it is. So it's not so much as a democracy as it is a something that has been revealed to the people as true and known. Eventually, everyone's just accepting it that this is what it is.
Is there anything specific that kind of led to the proliferation of his cult? Because, I mean, dying and when he did in this interwar period, it seems like a tough time for, things to spread easily. So I'm just wondering if it was post-World War II that he kind of made his way to Russia, or if it was in that interwar period, or if there are specific events that happened that people point to.
Dr. Ed, I will look into that to see if there was a catalyst point. What I suspect it is that it was because basically from the moment he died, he has not stopped. It's been miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. So for example, there was a village in Romania that had not had a priest in quite a while because of all the wars, etc. And so there were people that had been buried without funerals. There were couples that had not been married. There were children that had not been baptized. And so they didn't know what to do. So they wrote a letter to the patriarch saying, you got to send us somebody. You got to send us somebody. There's nobody, here to help us. And the patriarch, because he didn't have anybody at the time, saying, well, I'll get you somebody. I'll get you somebody. Don't worry. Just be patient. Well, one day a priest comes in and says, all right, let's go do it. So immediately starts doing liturgies, baptizing, doing weddings, funerals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the people loved it. They were just enthralled. And so they sent a letter to the patriarch saying, whoever it was that you sent us is what we want. We want you to assign him to us permanently. We want this to be our clergyman. And so he says, what? I didn't send anybody to you. And so he's getting a little angry because, you have to go through proper channels and paperwork, bureaucracy. And part of it's because, you want to make sure that it's not somebody that's swindling the people to say, oh, yeah, I'm a priest, give me money. Well, the thing is that he wouldn't accept a dime. He would accept nothing. He would just say, give your money to the church and keep praying. Don't give me anything. And so he says, okay, wait. So this guy didn't accept any money. He did all these sacraments. What did he sign the papers? Because every book has their registry, the black book. And it's, okay, let's go look. Nectarios of A.R.E. So he had basically gone and fulfilled the needs of that place. There are other stories, and again, these are in other countries. They're not in Greece. They're Russia and what have you. There was a story of a man that had cancer. They were going to try to do surgery to remove the cancer, and everyone was afraid. They didn't know what to do. And then suddenly, this doctor comes in and says, all right, this is the surgery we're going to do. And they just kind of say, okay, well, I guess he's the doctor in charge. They do the surgery, come out. The doctor goes to the family and says, okay, everything went fine. It was good. Don't worry. It's going to be good. And the main doctor comes in and goes, okay, wait, we're going to start surgery. It's like, we already had surgery. It was a success. He got rid of the cancer. And he said, what? Who came in? Who did this? And so they go to the catalog. The doctors have to sign in. And again, Nectarios of A.R.E. And of course, he's not the only saint that has done these kind of miracles, again, all over the world. And so my strong suspicion, Dr. Ed, is that it was miracles like this that spread his cult from place to place to place to place. And people started hearing about it from basically all over to say, okay, this is a saint that listens. This is a saint that's modern, which makes him immediately accessible no matter where you are, to say, okay, this is somebody from our time. And a lot of people, they gravitate to his story because, a lot of us sometimes feel maligned or not listened to and cast to the side, especially, as you said, during war-torn Europe, where people were marginalized and cast into gutters and just didn't know what was going to happen to them. So to have a saint that is that relatable, and not only relatable, but miraculous, really connected him to the people all over the world. For whatever war-torn country was going through, he was there, it seems. But I will look to see if there was a specific catalyst to each of these nations as to kind of what made him kind of explode all over the world. Because there are some amazing modern saints, and a couple of very powerful saints for different countries that do not have that level of cult following in countries outside of their native country.
And the book we'll be reading, who was the original audience that he'd written his work for?
So this book essentially is a collection of his lessons. So he basically was writing this over a course of 10 years. And so he published it after he was basically done at the seminary. So when it was published about, I'll have to look at the back of the book, but I think 1908, he died in 1920. So it was like 12 years before he died. And so basically what it was a collection of his classes and his notes. And so the audience was supposed to be clergy, the priests of that time. And when you read it, you're going to understand why, because again, it makes Christ very understandable and accessible to anybody that's reading it. And especially you want clergy to be able to understand, the intricacies of who and what is Jesus Christ, to be able to communicate that, because the whole purpose of our Christendom is to preach Christ crucified and our salvation through him. And so you want your priest to definitely understand, what does that mean? Who is Christ, and what does it mean to the rest of the world? Because what St. Nectarios is able to do very powerfully is he's able to address the fact that this is not something that is just for a limited group of people, it's for the entire world. And that's why he's going to start the book with the chapter Expectation of the Nations. And he's going to go through basically every major world religion and explain to you how Christ can hook into that and how every culture, every religion has some sort of savior story that they're able to link to and connect to. To try to give a little bit of examples. For Greek mythology, Athena was this idea of a savior kind of person, and this was the idea of a humanesque type person that came fully formed from the brow of God, Zeus in that regard. So this idea of a savior. He's going to talk about how in the same venue as St. Paul was able to link into the Greeks with their religion and that unknown God, there are other links in other religions that allow us to pull in, to use their language and talk about Christ to them, to say, okay, you've been waiting for this, you just didn't know it. And so he's going to basically tap into this idea that there has been an expectation throughout the entire world. It doesn't matter whether you're a Jew. This is one of the reasons why the Gentiles were coming in en masse so quickly, because this need, this inner need, is something that extends beyond just a mere religion. It's going to go through all the religions, and it touches us in every single nook and cranny of our being, psychologically, intellectually, spiritually. And he's going to go into that. And like I said, in a way that is very accessible.
Great. Yeah, it's interesting because like now, I would say within the last 5 years, like you see sort of like atheistic arguments about how like Jesus Christ, the maybe superficial similarities between Jesus Christ and, kind of like you mentioned, ancient mythologies, modern. So I don't know, it'll be really good to hear a saint approach that as, yes, we're actually tapping into something that's very universal, that everyone's actually been waiting for Christ, instead of sort of this modern way of looking at it that like Jesus is just one of many of these savior mythologies and, that kind of thing. So. Well,
exactly. And this to me is very critical. He's now a bishop, but at the time he was the chancellor of Jerusalem. He had told me that the biggest danger to the church is not Islam. He had told me that the greatest danger was Hindu. And the reason why is one of the most populous versions of Hindu is called Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is called the yoga of love. Have you ever heard of the book, the Bhagavad Gita? If you ever get a chance, it's neat. It basically talks about the idea of love. I mean, it's a very powerful work. It very much draws into people. The problem is that basically what that version of Hindu, because Hindu is kind of a loose term because it just means the religion of India, of which there are hundreds. Basically, Bhakti Yoga states that find a God, love that God, and be done. So their idea is that all gods are all the same. We're all trying to climb the mountain, and we waste time arguing with each other instead of climbing the mountain. So this syncretism is essentially what that is dangerous, because when we're trying to basically say it's all the same, Allah, Vishnu, Christ, all the same, well, it's not. They're very huge differences, and we have to understand what those differences are. But what St. Nectarios is going to tap into, and as I said, he really focuses and hammers on the way, the truth, and the life. And the reason why that's important is because Jesus Christ said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we just say, okay, yeah. But what that is that everyone is asking those questions. What is the way I should live? What is proper? What is ethical? How should we behave? I mean, politics all over the world is trying to answer that question. What is the right way for us to live? With autonomy, with oppression, with dictators, how should we be living? What is truth? What is reality? What is the world that we see now? And that people are trying to answer that question. What is reality? And then the final one, life. Every single religion, every single person is trying to figure out, how can I live forever? How am I going to extend from this reality that I'm in now past this? And so we're going to see how people have been trying to do that by answering it through different religions, how they've been doing it through statues. Like one of my favorite examples is from T.S. Eliot in his work Ozymandias, where it says, "Behold, my name is Ozymandias, look upon my works, you mighty in despair," in which it's basically a statue with legs. You can't even see what the statue was, and there's a wasteland. So what were his works? We don't know. So this idea of immortality through that wasn't immortality. It's ephemeral. All earthly glory fades and dies. So what is immortality? What is going to live forever? And so everyone's trying to answer that question. We're all trying to figure out what it is. The study of alchemy, trying to find what is the way to achieve immortality through drugs. Even today, we're looking at, and that's something that Dr. Perry is going to talk about in his talk on transhumanism in November, is now it's looking like we might be able to live more than just 100 years that we have now. We might be able to live 250, 300 years. We've found ways to basically combat aging. We have the ability now, and probably by the time of our children's generation, where cancer might not be an issue anymore because they're able to isolate and do these things. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to live forever, essentially. And so what does that mean? St. Nectarios taps into that and answers that question because Jesus Christ answered it. It's not a how to live, it's a who to live. It's not what is truth, it's who is truth. It's not what is life, who is life. And Jesus Christ answers that question for all of those things. And so every single person, every single culture, be it atheist or deeply religious, anything else, all taps into that central need. So when Jesus Christ says that, I am the way, the truth, and life, he is tapping into that core need that we all have. And that's kind of where St. Nectarios uses as his jumping board, his springboard into things. So what I would encourage everyone to do prior to our next class is to try to find the book, whether it's on Amazon. I'm not sure if we order it from the bookstore, if it'll be in church by Sunday. So if there's any copies of it available through Amazon Prime. I know that St. Nectarios Monastery in Roscoe, New York, they're the ones that translate it. So I don't know if they would be able to get it to our church quickly. I will see if we can't get it by then I will try to get some photocopies and scan those so that you can have those until you're able to get copies of your book. Any final questions or comments or thoughts?
Tell us the name of the book again.
It is called Christology by St. Nectarios, and it's spelled with a K.
It looks like, I don't know if this is the version, but it says it's translated by St. Nectarios Monastery, but it's on Amazon.
Yes.
And it looks like there's a Kindle version for $7.99 and a paperback for $18. So
a Kindle version? Oh, well, then you all can just do Kindle version.
Yeah. So you can buy that. But yeah, it's on. It looks like it's on Amazon.
Oh, that's perfect. I didn't know they had a. Oh my gosh, I love it. I mean, the only problem with Kindle is you're not able to write the margins, but you can have it on your device. So for those that do not have that, I recommend getting an Amazon account and then just downloading the Kindle app, which can be used on your computer. You don't have to have it on your smart device, and then you'll be able to read the text. Now, for those that have to have a paper version to read, some people can't stand reading, scrolling text on a screen. Of course, try to get the text version. But next week, we will try to see where we're all at and see if we've all read the first chapter, Expectation of the Nations. Sound good, everybody?
Great.
All right. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, Present all places, fill all things, come and dwell as cleanse of every stain and save our souls, O gracious Lord. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.